Once upon a time, there was a man named Daniel. Daniel was not the kind of man who demanded attention. He did not raise his voice. He did not push his way into conversations. He was the type of person who could stand in a crowded room and nobody would remember he was there. When people disrespected him, he would pause for just a moment, then continue like nothing happened. When they ignored him completely, he would simply adjust his collar and keep moving. Most people who saw Daniel every day did not really see him at all. They saw a uniform. They saw a job title. They saw someone whose name they did not need to remember. But if you looked closely, really looked, you would notice something unusual. Daniel's posture never broke. His eyes held something that pressure could not crush. His silence was not weakness. It was choice. Pause for just a second. Subscribe to this channel right now so you never miss an episode. Give this video a like if you're feeling the story and drop a comment. Even just one word, so I know you're with me. Notifications on. All right, let's see what happens next. The problem was this. Daniel worked for a woman who believed power meant making others feel small. Her name was Veronica Hale. Veronica was not just rich. She was the kind of wealthy that came with its own temperature, cold, controlled, and designed to make you aware of the distance between her world and yours. She did not simply enter rooms. She dominated them. Conversations would shift the moment she arrived, like everyone had been holding their breath, waiting for permission to speak. Her laugh was loud and sharp. Her opinions were delivered like verdicts. And when she wanted something, the room rearranged itself to provide it. Her wealth was not the quiet kind that whispered. It shouted. It sparkled on her wrists, glittered at her throat, clicked beneath her heels on marble floors. She wore her status like armor, and she made sure everyone around her knew exactly where they stood in her hierarchy. To Veronica, the world was a ladder. Some people were worth knowing. Most were simply useful. And a few, like Daniel, were barely worth noticing at all. Veronica's birthday parties were not just celebrations. They were events. Legends, even. Red carpets rolled out like royal announcements. Velvet ropes separated the worthy from the waiting. Photographers lined up to capture her entrance like she was royalty stepping onto foreign soil. Guests did not simply dress well. They dressed to compete, to intimidate, to prove they belonged in her orbit. The lights were always too bright. The music was always too loud. And Veronica stood at the center of it all, glowing with the kind of confidence that only comes from never having been told no. She treated people the way she organized her closet, by category and importance. Friends at the top, business partners just below, service staff at the very bottom, acknowledged only when necessary. To her, this was not cruelty. This was simply order. This was how the world worked. You respected those above you, and you managed those beneath you. It was clean. It was efficient. It made sense. And standing just outside the glow of her spotlight, always within reach but never truly seen, was Daniel. Daniel was her driver. He had been for 3 years. 3 years of opening doors, carrying bags, waiting in parking lots while she attended events he would never be invited to. 3 years of Daniel, we're late, and Daniel, don't take that route. And Daniel, why is the car not cooler? She had never asked him where he came from, never wondered if he had family, dreams, a life that existed beyond the 10 hours a day he spent behind her steering wheel. She did not know his last name. She did not know his birthday. She did not care. In Veronica's world, drivers were furniture with pulses. They were supposed to be clean, quiet, and ready. They were supposed to appear exactly when needed and disappear exactly when dismissed. They were not supposed to have opinions, bad days, or complicated inner lives. They certainly were not supposed to be equal. That morning, Daniel stood beside her sleek black Range Rover in the curved driveway of her Lecky Phase 1 estate. The house behind him was massive, white stone, floor-to-ceiling windows, a fountain in the front yard that cost more than most people earned in a year. The gate was tall enough to block out the world. The hedges were trimmed into perfect geometric shapes. Everything about the property screamed control. Daniel checked his watch, then ran a cloth over the side mirror, even though it was already spotless. He had learned long ago that it was better to look busy than to look idle. Idle made her suspicious. Idle made her think you were wasting her time. He heard the front door open. Then he heard the heels. Sharp, fast, expensive. Daniel. Veronica's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. Why are you just standing there? Do you think I pay you to admire the driveway? Daniel turned smoothly, his face calm. Good morning, Mrs. Hale. The car is ready. Good morning. She stopped in front of him, oversized sunglasses hiding half her face. What's good about it when you're making me late? If you're enjoying this story, show some love, subscribe to the channel, smash that like button, and drop a comment telling me what you think is going to happen next. Your support keeps these stories coming. Don't forget to turn on notifications. Let's keep going. Daniel was calm in a way that made people uncomfortable. Not the kind of calm that came from having nothing to lose. Not the emptiness of someone who had given up. This was different. This was the kind of calm that sat deep in the chest and refused to be shaken. The kind that made loud people feel like they were performing for an audience that was not impressed. It was the calm of a man who had seen enough to know that noise was not the same as power. Veronica had mistaken that calm for weakness from the very first day. She would snap at him in the morning, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Daniel, are you deaf? I said I need to leave in 10 minutes, not whenever you feel like it. And Daniel would nod once, smooth and unbothered, and say, Understood, ma'am. His voice never rose. His face never tightened. He simply absorbed her words the way water absorbs a stone, without resistance, without reaction. To Veronica, this meant she had control. It meant he knew his place. It meant she could speak to him however she wanted because he would take it. She thought his silence was fear. She thought his steadiness was surrender. She had no idea how wrong she was. Daniel spoke softly, but when he did speak, his words carried weight. Not the manufactured weight of someone trying to sound important, but the natural gravity of someone who only spoke when there was something worth saying. He did not fill silence with chatter. He did not explain himself unless asked. And even then, his answers were clean, precise, and finished. There was no rambling, no nervous laughter, no need to be liked. He moved deliberately, never rushed, never clumsy. When he opened the car door for Veronica, his motion was smooth, practiced, but not robotic. When he placed her bags in the trunk, he handled them with care, not because she demanded it, but because that was simply how he did things. There was a discipline in every gesture, a control that did not announce itself, but was impossible to miss if you were paying attention. Veronica was not paying attention. Even in simple clothes, Daniel looked composed. His uniform was nothing special. Black trousers, a white button-down shirt, polished black shoes. Standard driver attire. But somehow, on him, it looked different. The shirt was always pressed with clean, sharp lines down the sleeves. The collar sat perfectly flat. The shoes reflected light like they had been shined that morning, which they had. His shoulders were always straight, never slumped, never rolled forward in the posture of exhaustion or defeat. When he stood tall. Not puffed up, not trying to take up space, just present. Solid. Like a man who knew exactly where his feet were planted and had no intention of being moved unless he chose to move. His hands, when they rested at his sides, were relaxed but ready. His jaw was set but not clenched. And his eyes were the most dangerous part of him, though no one seemed to notice. They were steady, watchful. They took in everything. Daniel listened more than he spoke. While Veronica was on her phone in the back seat, complaining to her friends about traffic, about her contractors, about how exhausting it was to manage people who couldn't follow simple instructions, Daniel listened. He absorbed the names she mentioned, the places she was going, the tone she used when she talked about certain people. He filed it all away, not because he planned to use it, but because listening was a habit he had built long ago. He observed more than he reacted. When Veronica snapped at him for taking a route she suddenly decided she didn't like, he did not argue. He did not defend his choice. He simply adjusted, his face unchanging, his hands steady on the wheel. When she made a cutting remark about his shirt, again, he glanced down for half a second, then returned his eyes to the road without comment. Veronica interpreted this silence as submission. She saw a man who took orders and kept his head down. A man who had accepted his position at the bottom of her world and learned to live there quietly. She thought his lack of reaction meant he had nothing to say, that his calm meant he had been tamed. She never stopped to wonder why a man who had been disrespected daily for 3 years still carried himself like someone who had never been broken. What Veronica did not realize, what she could not realize because she had never once looked at Daniel as a full person, was that he was not enduring humiliation. He was conserving dignity. There was a difference, and it was enormous. Daniel had not given up his self-respect. He had protected it. He had wrapped it in silence and discipline and patience, and he had kept it somewhere Veronica's words could not reach. Every insult she threw at him landed on the surface and slid off. Every dismissive glance, every condescending tone, every moment she treated him like he was less than, he absorbed it without letting it inside. Because Daniel knew something Veronica did not. Silence was not weakness. Endurance was not surrender. And patience, real patience, was not passive. It was preparation. Real quick before we continue. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. You don't want to miss the next. Hit the like button if this story has you invested, and leave a comment with your reaction. I want to hear from you. Okay, let's move forward. On the morning of her birthday, Veronica stood in front of her full-length mirror, turning slowly from side to side, examining herself with the focused attention of an artist admiring their own masterpiece. Her skin glowed. Her dress, a custom-made emerald green piece that had cost more than some people's cars, hugged her body in all the places magazines said it should. Her jewelry caught the morning light and threw it back in sharp, expensive flashes. Her makeup was flawless. Her hair was swept up in a style that had taken her stylist 2 hours to perfect. She looked powerful. She looked untouchable. She looked exactly like the woman she believed herself to be. She smiled at her reflection, a slow, satisfied smile that reached her eyes. Tonight was going to be perfect. The venue was booked, one of the most exclusive event centers in Victoria Island. The guest list was a carefully curated mix of Lagos elite. Business moguls, politicians, celebrities, influencers with verified badges and egos to match. The decor would be breathtaking. The food would be exquisite. The champagne would flow like water. And she, Veronica Hale, would stand at the center of it all, soaking in the attention she had earned simply by being herself. But as she turned away from the mirror, an idea formed in her mind. It started as a flicker, then grew into something brighter, something more entertaining. Her smile widened, but this time it carried a different quality. This smile was sharp. It had edges. She picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found Daniel's number. She paused for a moment, her thumb hovering over the call button, imagining the scene that was about to unfold in her head. Then she pressed it. Daniel answered on the second ring, his voice steady, as always. "Yes, Mrs. Hale." "Daniel," Veronica said, her tone dripping with a sweetness that did not belong to her. "I've been thinking. You've been working for me for 3 years now. 3 whole years. And I realized I've never really appreciated you properly." There was a pause on the other end. Not long, but just enough for Veronica to notice. "Thank you, ma'am," Daniel said carefully. "So, I've decided," Veronica continued, pacing now, her heels clicking against the marble floor of her bedroom, "that you should come to my birthday party tonight. As my guest." Another pause. "I'll send you the details," she added quickly, before he could respond. "It starts at 7. Don't be late." Then she hung up, not waiting for his answer, already imagining the chaos she had just set in motion. Her plan was simple, elegant even. She would place Daniel, her driver, in his simple clothes and his quiet manners, right in the middle of her glittering, sharp-edged world. She would seat him at a table with people who measured worth in luxury brands and vacation homes. She would watch as he fumbled with the silverware, as he struggled to keep up with conversations about investments and art collections and summer houses in Dubai. She would watch the other guests notice him, whisper about him, exchange amused glances across the room, and she would stand back and let discomfort do the humiliation for her. She would not have to say a word. The contrast alone would destroy him. The gap between who he was and where he had been placed would be the joke. And everyone would laugh, Not loudly, not cruelly, but in that subtle, polite way that was somehow worse. The kind of laughter that happened behind hands and champagne glasses. The kind that said, "Why is he even here?" Veronica could already hear the whispers, already see the raised eyebrows, already taste the satisfaction of watching someone so beneath her be reminded of exactly where they belonged. She felt a thrill run through her chest. This was not kindness. This was not generosity. This was entertainment. And tonight, Daniel would be the punchline she had crafted specifically for her own amusement. What Veronica did not expect was Daniel's reaction when she saw him later that afternoon. She had come downstairs to leave for a final venue check, and Daniel was already standing by the car, as always. She studied his face, searching for the fear she assumed would be there. The nervousness. The hesitation of a man who had just been invited into a world designed to chew him up and spit him out. But there was none of that. Daniel simply nodded when their eyes met. "I received your message, Mrs. Hale. I'll be there at 7. His voice was calm. His posture was unchanged. His eyes held that same steady, unreadable quality they always did. There was no panic, no gratitude, no visible emotion at all. Just acceptance. For the first time, a flicker of something uncomfortable moved through Veronica's chest. It was small, barely noticeable, like a pebble dropped into still water. She ignored it, pushed it down, told herself she was imagining things. But the crack had formed, and cracks, once started, only grow wider. Before you move to the next, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. Drop a like if you're hooked, and comment below with your thoughts. I read every single one. Now let's continue. The venue looked like something out of a dream, or a movie about people who had too much money and wanted everyone to know it. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen fireworks, each one holding what looked like 1,000 pieces of cut glass that caught the light and scattered it across the room in sharp, glittering patterns. The walls were draped in white silk that moved slightly whenever someone walked past, giving the whole space a feeling of motion, even when everything was still. Gold accents traced the edges of everything. The tables, the chairs, the frames around enormous mirrors that reflected the crowd back at itself, multiplied and magnificent. The red carpet stretched from the street entrance all the way to the main doors, flanked on both sides by velvet ropes and photographers who had been hired specifically to make guests feel like celebrities. Their cameras flashed constantly, creating bursts of white light that punctuated the evening like exclamation marks. Above the entrance, Veronica's name glowed in elegant script made of lights. Veronica Hale, a night to remember. And she had made sure it would be. Guests began arriving just after 7, stepping out of luxury cars that purred to a stop at the carpet's edge. Doors opened, heels touched pavement, and the performance began. Women emerged in gowns that probably cost more than a year of rent. Silk, satin, sequins, feathers, fabrics that shimmered and moved like liquid. Men wore tailored suits cut so perfectly they looked like they had been sewn directly onto their bodies. Watches caught the light. Jewelry sparkled. Perfume mixed with the night air. Applause greeted every familiar face. Cheers erupted for the celebrities. Cameras clicked furiously for the influencers who paused mid-step to pose, angling their faces toward the light with the practiced ease of people who had done this 1,000 times before. Inside, the energy was electric. Waiters in crisp white shirts and black bow ties moved through the crowd, carrying trays of champagne and tall, thin glasses that caught the light and looked like liquid gold. There were towers of food arranged like art installations. Seafood on ice, fruits carved into shapes, desserts that looked too perfect to eat, but that people ate anyway. A live band played in the corner, smooth jazz that added just the right amount of sophistication without overpowering conversation. And at the center of it all, near the entrance where she could see and be seen by everyone, stood Veronica. She wore a striking royal blue dress that hugged her figure before flowing out at the bottom in layers of fabric that moved when she turned. The neckline was bold. The back was open. Diamonds hung from her ears and wrapped around her wrist. Her makeup was dramatic, sharp eyeliner, bold lips, skin that seemed to glow from within. She looked like a queen. She felt like one too. People gravitated toward her in waves. Air kisses. Compliments. You look stunning. This venue is incredible. Happy birthday, darling. She smiled, laughed, accepted every word like it was her due. Because this was her night, her celebration, her world, and everyone in it was here because she had allowed them to be. Laughter echoed through the space, bouncing off the high ceilings and mixing with the music and the clink of glasses. Conversations swirled around topics that mattered only to people in rooms like this. Who had just bought what property, who was vacationing where, whose business deal had just closed, whose marriage was rumored to be falling apart. The air itself seemed to buzz with a particular frequency, the frequency of importance, of people who believed they mattered more than others simply because they were here and most people were not. Veronica moved through the crowd like she owned it, which in a way, she did. She stopped to chat with a senator. She posed for a photo with a Nollywood actress. She accepted a toast from a group of business partners who raised their glasses and called her a visionary. She glowed under the attention, feeding on it, growing brighter with every compliment. Everything was perfect, and then, just after 8 o'clock, something shifted. A car pulled up outside, a sleek black sedan, understated but unmistakably expensive. It stopped smoothly at the edge of the red carpet, and the photographers instinctively raised their cameras, ready for whoever was about to emerge. But this car didn't match the rhythm of the others. There was something different about it. The door didn't open immediately. There was a pause, a beat of stillness that made people near the entrance turn their heads. Inside the venue, someone near the window noticed. Then another person, then another. Conversations began to slow, not stopping completely, but softening, like someone had turned down the volume slightly. I shifted toward the entrance. Glasses paused halfway to lips. The energy in the room changed, not dramatically, but noticeably, like the air pressure had dropped just before a storm. Veronica was mid-laugh with a group of friends when she felt it. That strange pull of attention moving away from her and toward something else. She turned toward the entrance, her smile still in place, her champagne glass still raised. The car door opened, and everything stopped. Pause for just a second. Subscribe to this channel right now so you never miss an episode. Give this video a like if you're feeling the story, and drop a comment, even just one word, so I know you're with me. Notifications on. Let's go to the next. The door opened, and Daniel stepped out. Time did not stop. Not literally, but it felt like it did. Like someone had pressed pause on the entire evening, just long enough for the world to register what it was seeing. He wore a cream suit. Not off-white. Not beige. Cream. Rich, smooth, perfectly tailored cream that caught the light from the chandeliers and the camera flashes and seemed to glow against his skin. The jacket fit his shoulders like it had been made specifically for his frame, which it had. The lapels were sharp, precise, elegant. The vest underneath added depth, structure, a layered sophistication that spoke of attention to detail. The pants broke perfectly at his shoes, polished leather that reflected light like black mirrors. A crisp white shirt underneath, open at the collar, just enough to suggest confidence without trying too hard. A dark pocket square folded with geometric precision. A watch on his wrist that was understated but unmistakably expensive, the kind that people who knew watches would recognize immediately. But it was not just the clothes. It was the way he wore them. Daniel stood beside the car for just a moment, his hand still on the door, his eyes scanning the scene in front of him with the calm assessment of someone who had walked red carpets before. His posture was perfect, shoulders back, spine straight, head held high, but not in arrogance. In certainty, in the quiet, unshakable knowledge of someone who knew exactly who he was and had no need to prove it to anyone. Then he closed the car door with a smooth, deliberate motion and began to walk. The red carpet seemed to welcome him. Each step was measured, unhurried, deliberate. He did not rush. He did not hesitate. He moved like a man who had been invited to this kind of event 100 times before and knew that the cameras, the lights, the audience, they were all part of the experience, but they did not define him. He walked like he belonged, and something extraordinary happened. The applause started softly, almost tentatively, from somewhere near the front. One person, then two, then a cluster. It was not scripted. It was not planned. It was instinctive, the kind of response that happens when people witness something unexpected and impressive and do not quite know how to process it except to acknowledge it. Then it spread. Phones rose into the air. Cameras turned toward him. Flashes erupted like small fireworks. The photographers who had been hired to capture celebrities suddenly found themselves captured by something else, a presence they had not anticipated. "Who is that?" someone whispered near the entrance. "I don't know, but look at that suit. He looks like he just stepped off a magazine cover." "Wait, is that our driver?" The whisper moved through the crowd like electricity through water, fast and unstoppable. Faces turned, eyes widened. People leaned toward each other, murmuring, pointing subtly, trying not to stare, but unable to look away. Daniel did not acknowledge the attention. He did not wave. He did not smile for the cameras. He simply walked, his face calm, his gaze steady, his presence filling the space around him in a way that did not demand attention, but commanded it anyway. Guests who had been laughing seconds before fell silent. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Champagne glasses stopped halfway to lips. The entire energy of the room shifted, not chaotically, but completely. The focus, which had been scattered across 100 small interactions, suddenly had a center. And that center was Daniel. Inside the venue, near the entrance where she had been holding court just moments before, Veronica saw him. Her smile froze on her face. Her champagne glass tilted slightly in her hand, forgotten. Her eyes locked onto Daniel as he approached, and for the first time that evening, maybe for the first time in years, Veronica did not know what to say. Her hand lifted slowly to her mouth, fingers pressing against her lips as if trying to hold back words that had suddenly become impossible to form. Shock washed across her face in waves. Her eyes went wide. Her body went still. The carefully constructed mask of confidence and control that she had worn all night cracked, and beneath it was something raw and unguarded. Confusion, disbelief, and underneath that, something sharper, fear. Because in that moment, Veronica understood something that she had not allowed herself to see before. The joke she had crafted, the humiliation she had designed, the trap she had set, had just collapsed. Not because Daniel had argued with her, not because he had refused to come, not because he had tried to fight back in any visible way, but because he had shown up as someone she did not recognize, someone she had never bothered to see. The guests around her were not laughing at Daniel. They were not whispering cruel jokes or exchanging pitying glances. They were staring at him with something close to admiration, respect, curiosity. Some were even applauding. And Veronica, who had spent the entire evening at the center of attention, suddenly felt herself shrinking. Power, she realized in that terrible, crystallizing moment, was not always loud. It was not always decorated with diamonds and designer labels. Sometimes power was quiet. Sometimes it was patient. Sometimes it walked into a room in a cream suit and changed everything without saying a single word. Daniel reached the entrance. He stopped. He looked directly at Veronica, and he smiled. Not mockingly, not triumphantly, but with a calm, knowing warmth that said everything without saying anything at all. The room held its breath, and the night that was supposed to belong to Veronica Hale became the night everyone remembered Daniel. Before you move to the next, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. Drop a like if you're hooked, and comment below with your thoughts. I read every single one. Now let's continue. The whispers started like ripples on water, small at first, spreading outward in widening circles until they touched every corner of the room. Wait, do I know him? He looks so familiar. I swear I've seen that face somewhere before. Is he someone? He has to be someone. People leaned toward each other, voices dropping to that particular pitch of urgent curiosity that happens when something unexpected disrupts a carefully planned evening. Eyes tracked Daniel as he moved further into the venue, no longer just observing him but studying him, searching their memories for where they had seen that face, that posture, that presence before. Near the back of the room, a woman in a silver gown grabbed her husband's arm. "That's Daniel Okonkwo," she hissed, her eyes wide with recognition. Her husband squinted. Who? Daniel Okonkwo. She repeated, more urgently this time. The architect. The one who designed the Meridian Complex in Abuja. And that hotel in Cape Town that won all those awards. I thought he'd moved abroad. Her husband's expression shifted from confusion to surprise. That's him. She nodded, already pulling out her phone, fingers flying across the screen to confirm what her memory was telling her. The recognition spread. An older man in a dark suit, a real estate developer whose name appeared regularly in business magazines, stopped mid-conversation and turned fully toward Daniel. His mouth opened slightly. Then he excused himself from his group and began moving in Daniel's direction. A photographer near the entrance, one of the professionals hired for the event, lowered his camera for a moment, staring at Daniel like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Then his eyes lit up. He raised his camera again and started shooting rapidly, frame after frame. His focus completely shifted from the scripted celebrity shots to this unexpected subject. He had photographed Daniel years ago at an architecture gala in London. He was sure of it. A fashion executive, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and sharper instincts, stood frozen near the champagne tower, her glass halfway to her lips. She knew that face. She had sat across from it at a design conference in Milan 3 years ago. But that man had been introduced as a rising star in sustainable architecture, someone the European design community was watching closely. What was he doing here? And why had he been arriving in Veronica Hale's car? The pieces were not adding up, and the confusion only made people more curious. Daniel moved through the space with the same calm he had carried on the red carpet. He did not rush to explain himself. He did not announce who he was or correct anyone's assumptions. He simply existed, fully and comfortably, in a way that made people want to approach him rather than avoid him. When someone extended a hand, he shook it warmly, his grip firm but not aggressive. When someone asked his name, he answered simply, Daniel. When they asked what he did, he smiled and said, I work with spaces. I help design them. There was no arrogance in his tone, no need to dominate the conversation or prove his worth. He asked questions. He listened when people spoke. He laughed genuinely at jokes. He showed interest in others without performing interest. He was, in every sense, gracious. And that graciousness, that quiet, confident warmth, was more magnetic than any boast could have been. People gravitated toward him naturally, the way conversations in a room always drift toward the most interesting person present. A small circle formed around Daniel, then a larger one. Questions came from every direction. Where have you been working? I heard you did something incredible in South Africa. Are you taking on new projects? Why haven't we seen you around Lagos recently? Daniel answered each question with patience and humility, never cutting anyone off, never dismissing smaller voices to focus on more important ones. He treated the young photographer and the powerful senator with the same respect, the same attention, the same dignity. And with every interaction, the energy in the room continued to shift. Conversations that had been happening near Veronica, around Veronica, about Veronica, began to dissolve. People excused themselves mid-sentence. Eyes drifted away from her and toward the growing crowd surrounding Daniel. The orbit she had created so carefully, the gravitational pull she had built her entire evening around, weakened with every passing minute. For the first time that night, Veronica felt something she had not felt in years. She felt unseen. She stood near the center of the room in her striking blue dress, her diamonds still sparkling, her makeup still flawless, but the attention that had been flowing toward her like a river had changed course. It was moving somewhere else now, toward someone else. She watched as a prominent business mogul, someone she had been trying to get a meeting with for months, walked past her without a glance and headed straight toward Daniel. She watched as her own friends, people she had invited personally, drifted away from her circle and joined his. She watched as cameras that had been pointed at her all evening turned toward him, and she felt something cold and unfamiliar settle in her chest. The driver she had mocked was now the center of gravity. The man she had invited as a punchline had become the main event. The joke she had crafted so carefully, the trap she had set with such confidence, had not just failed. It had reversed entirely. She had placed Daniel in the spotlight, expecting him to crumble under its heat, but instead, he had absorbed it, reflected it, and made it his own. Veronica's hand tightened around her champagne glass. Her jaw clenched. Her mind raced, trying to find an explanation, a way to regain control, a strategy to pull the focus back to where it belonged. But there was nothing she could do, because power, real power, could not be assigned by invitation or title or wealth. It was earned through presence, through character, through the way a person moved through the world and made others feel when they were near. And tonight, in a room full of people who measured worth in designer labels and bank accounts, Daniel had reminded everyone that dignity could not be bought. It could only be carried, and he had been carrying his all along. By the time the night reached its final hours, Daniel had been approached more times than he could count. Business cards accumulated in his pocket like small, paper promises. A hotel developer from Dubai wanted to discuss a project overlooking the Persian Gulf. An international architecture firm asked if he'd consider consulting on their West African expansion. A magazine editor requested an interview about his design philosophy and the years he'd spent working quietly outside Nigeria. A tech entrepreneur wanted to know if he'd be interested in designing their new headquarters in Lagos. Opportunities circled him like birds finding solid ground after a storm. But Daniel did not celebrate loudly. He did not raise his glass in triumph or make grand pronouncements about his return. He simply listened, as he always had. He took cards with genuine gratitude. He asked thoughtful questions. He promised to follow up. And when people thanked him for his time, he thanked them back, as if their interest in him was a gift he had not expected but would not take for granted. There was no performance in his humility. It was simply who he was. As the crowd began to thin and guests started making their way toward the exit, Daniel found himself standing near the edge of the venue, away from the remaining clusters of conversation. He checked his watch, nearly midnight. The night that was supposed to humiliate him had instead restored something he had set aside 3 years ago: visibility. He took a breath, then turned and walked toward Veronica. She was standing near the entrance with 2 friends, her smile smaller now, her energy dimmed. She saw him approaching, and her body tensed almost imperceptibly. Her friends noticed Daniel and went quiet, their eyes moving between the 2 of them like spectators at a tennis match. "Mrs. Hale," Daniel said, his voice calm and clear. Veronica straightened, forcing her professional mask back into place. "Daniel, you certainly made an impression tonight." "I hope it was a good one," he replied evenly. There was a pause, not hostile, but heavy with everything unspoken. "I wanted to thank you," Daniel continued, "for the job, for the 3 years. I learned a lot working for you." Veronica blinked, caught off guard. You're welcome. "And I wanted to let you know," Daniel said, his tone still gentle but firm, "that I'll be resigning, effective immediately. I'll make sure the car is returned tomorrow morning, and I'll handle all the paperwork cleanly. No complications." Veronica's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out at first. Then, quietly, "You're quitting?" "Yes, ma'am," Daniel said. "It's time." There was no anger in his voice, no bitterness, no vindictive satisfaction, just closure. Clean, respectful, final. He extended his hand. Veronica stared at it for a moment, then slowly reached out and shook it. Her grip was weak, uncertain, as if she was shaking hands with a stranger she had never truly met. "I wish you well," Daniel said. And then he turned and walked out into the night, leaving Veronica standing in the doorway of her own party, surrounded by people, yet somehow completely alone. Weeks passed. Veronica tried to move on, tried to reclaim the rhythm of her life. She hired a new driver, a quiet man who arrived on time and followed instructions without question. She hosted another event, smaller this time, and people came and complimented her and said all the right things. But something had changed. One morning, she was stuck in traffic on her way to a client meeting when she saw it. A billboard. Massive, impossible to miss. Daniel's face staring down at the city, composed and confident beside the words, "Daniel Okonkwo, redefining African architecture." Her breath caught. The next week, she was flipping through a high-end lifestyle magazine while waiting at a salon, and there he was again. A 6-page spread featuring his work, clean lines, sustainable designs, buildings that seemed to breathe. The headline read, "The architect who disappeared and returned a visionary." Then she saw him at an event, not as a driver this time, but as a guest of honor. He was being introduced on stage, receiving an award for innovation in design. The applause was thunderous. Cameras flashed. People stood. Veronica watched from the back of the room, her champagne glass untouched in her hand. Daniel had risen, not through bitterness, not through revenge, not by tearing anyone down or gloating over past humiliations. He had risen because he had always been someone worth rising. The world had simply been given the chance to see it again. He appeared in interviews, calm and articulate, speaking about his philosophy, that dignity was not negotiable, that silence was not surrender, that patience was the long game worth playing. He credited his time away from the spotlight as a season of learning, of humility, of remembering what mattered. He never mentioned Veronica by name. He did not need to. Success, it turned out, did not need cruelty to validate it. It did not need to mock those left behind or settle scores with the past. It simply needed to exist fully and authentically and let the work speak for itself. Veronica, meanwhile, found herself attending events where the applause that once followed her had grown quieter. Invitations still came, but fewer than before. People still smiled at her, but the warmth had cooled. She had not done anything scandalous. She had not failed publicly, but something intangible had shifted. She was no longer the woman everyone wanted to be near. She had become the woman everyone remembered for treating someone badly, someone who had turned out to be worth far more than she had ever imagined. Late at night, alone in her big house with its tall gates and manicured hedges, Veronica would sometimes think about that moment on the red carpet. The moment Daniel had stepped out of the car and shattered her joke with nothing but his presence. And she would realize, too late, the lesson she had refused to learn when it mattered. Dignity always outlasts mockery. Always. And that's where Daniel's story ends, but yours doesn't have to. If this story inspired you, moved you, or made you think differently about how you treat people, do 3 things for me right now. First, hit that subscribe button and turn on all notifications so you never miss stories like this. Second, smash that like button. It helps more people discover these lessons. And third, drop a comment below. Tell me, have you ever been underestimated? Or have you underestimated someone and regretted it? Share your story. I read every comment. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, share it with them. Until next time, remember, dignity always wins.